Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments, such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org.
Hi, I'm Charlie Hunt.
And I'm Jackie Kettler. We're both political scientists who also love to gossip about political scandals.
In Season 1 of Scandalized, we told the stories of some of our favorite scandals from across American history.
While we work on Season 2, we're dropping 5 brand new bite-sized episodes to whet your appetite.
Listen to new episodes of Scandalized starting Monday, September 29th at boisestatepublicradio.org or wherever you get your podcasts.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. Bosnian bears, tuna melts, how not to eat a pizza, and an amazing update on a governor getting lost on the Appalachian Trail. Where else could you find all of these delicious political scandals but Scandalized, the podcast that breaks them down and dives into what they really mean and how they changed American politics? Boise State University political scientists Charlie Hunt and Jackie Kettler are back with a mini season of their popular podcast, A Tide Us Over, before Season 2 comes out. And they're joining us with a preview today. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Gemma.
Glad to join you.
So let's talk about Season 1 real quick. It came out last year and it went viral. Charlie, were you surprised at how popular the podcast has become?
I mean, in some ways, yes. I've never gone viral before. But in other ways, I mean, I think when Jackie and I decided to start this podcast, it was obviously out of an interest in politics. We're both political scientists. But, you know, we were hopeful that the sort of organic interest, kind of gossipy interest in political scandals that Jackie and I certainly share was maybe reflected in the public, that the public was, you know, entranced by some of these scandals when they happened, that they get a lot of media attention, but also that they might have questions, you know, maybe deeper questions about what went on behind the scenes of these scandals, what could explain how some mattered and some didn't, who got in trouble and who didn't, which ones have sort of lasting value in helping us understand politics. And so we were hopeful, certainly, that it would be a nice mix of those things and catch on. But certainly, I think I can speak for both of us and say we're very happy with the reception it got and the number of folks who come up to us sometimes and say they're fans. It's pretty incredible.
And Jackie, remind us again how the idea of Scandalized got started and why you wanted to do the podcast.
Yeah, well, we like to talk about that Charlie and I just enjoyed getting together over a beer, meeting for happy hour, and so frequently we would start talking about political scandals. We're both just fascinated by them. We enjoy them a lot. It really is our version, as Charlie describes it, as nerd gossip, and that we just really love digging into these scandals. And eventually we're like, we think we have something here. Maybe other people would be interested. And then, as Charlie will often say, well, what do? You start a podcast.
Of course, right? Okay, so you're getting ready for Season 2, as I mentioned, but you did want to kind of, you know, give us a few political appetizers to whet our appetite. So, Charlie, how many of these mini episodes are the two of you doing?
So we've got 5 episodes here. 4 of them have come out already, and then we have one more, our last episode coming out next week, which is actually a recording of the live show we did earlier this year as part of the Tree Fort lineup, which was a ton of fun. We had a great live audience, including some audience participation when we talked about some of the scandals. So that was a ton of fun. But we've got 4 other episodes that have already come out that, you know, tend to focus on the lighter side of things. They're a little shorter than our typical episodes, a little more bite-sized. Just to sort of tide folks off. We've already got some great ideas for Season 2, or we hope they're great ideas, and we're going to work on those next year, but we hope folks enjoy these ones in the meantime.
Okay, so in Season 1, as a refresher, you told us how South Carolina Governor Mark Sanford disappeared for a week back in 2009 in what became known as the Appalachian Trail scandal. So after it came out, you actually got a call from one of the key players in this scandal, and this person gave you an insider's account of what happened. So I wanted to start with when his chief of staff figured out that Sanford was missing. So let's take a listen.
Monday morning, this is when it really sinks in because I'm in my office and the communications director walks in. He's on the phone and he's having a conversation with the first lady. And so he hands me the phone and she says, I just talked to Jim Davenport, who was an AP reporter back in that time. I just talked to Jim Davenport and I told him that Mark's been gone all weekend and he missed Father's Day with his children and I don't know where he is. And I said, you don't know where he is at all, Jenny? Have you talked to him this weekend? She goes, nope. And he's your problem now. And she hangs up on me.
Oh, okay. And he's your problem now. So tell us who this is and how did he get in touch with the two of you?
So this is Scott English, who was a long-term staffer for Mark Sanford. He had worked for Sanford when he was in Congress and then came and joined him in South Carolina and was serving as chief of staff when Sanford went missing. And after we published the episode last year about Mark Sanford's disappearance, Scott reached out to us. And I will say I was a little nervous at first opening the email. I was like, oh no, what happened? But he was really complimentary and saying that he thought we did a fair treatment. And if we ever wanted to talk with him to dive in deeper in the scandal, that he'd be happy to chat, which we were thrilled to take him up on.
Well, of course. Okay, so let's stay with what Scott told you. So here's a little more from Scandalized.
And so my staff is telling me this story that he's on the Appalachian Trail. And I believe it because, again, I think that this guy's going to go to isolation so he can write this book. So we ultimately decided to put that out there just to sort of try to let some air out of the situation and try to de-escalate it. But that didn't help. It just didn't.
So tensions are high, the media isn't buying the story, and there's a lot of mistrust and confusion within the staff. And according to Scott, things don't get easier once Sanford finally calls him back.
He goes, hey, what's going on? And I said, well, everybody's looking for you. And he goes, no, seriously, what's going on? I said, Mark, where are you? Are you safe? And he says, yes, I'm safe. And I said, okay, Mark, you need to get your ass back here. And he goes, I'll be back tomorrow. And I said, wait, why tomorrow? Why not today? Where are you? I'll get the plane. We'll go and get you right now. I said, this is an international news story. And he's like, you're being dramatic. And I said, not at all. Turn on any television news cable network that you want. I said, my God, Jon Stewart made jokes about this last night. Stephen Colbert made jokes about this last night. He goes, look, I'll be back tomorrow. And I said, well, what am I supposed to tell the press? And he goes, tell them I'll be back tomorrow. I got to go. Hangs up. So I put a statement out and I said, I spoke to the governor this morning. He assures me he'll be back in Columbia on Wednesday. Of course, that's not enough information for anybody. So I'm just getting bombarded with, well, where is he? What's going on? And I'm just like, I don't know. So don't call these reporters back is basically what our choice was.
So what is your reaction after Scott calls you and he's telling you this part of the story?
I mean, in a way, it was not surprising just because we had spent so much time kind of immersed in this scandal. It's a scandal from not all that long ago. I think for both Jackie and I, it's kind of like a formative scandal of like our young adulthood in terms of forming how we think about political scandals. And so, we had our own ideas about what had happened and we read the news accounts and all this stuff. But a staffer's perspective is unbelievably valuable, especially someone like Scott, who was, like Jackie said, he was the chief of staff, meaning he was basically in charge of the office, right? And he was in charge of the operation of the office, which becomes all that much more important if the boss decides to just take off and go to God knows where for a few days. And so, getting his perspective was important, and I think added a new layer to this in that he was able to sort of lay out who knew what and who didn't, and it turned out nobody really knew anything. And that really spoke volumes about sort of the quality of the relationship between Sanford and his staff that I think was really interesting.
Mm-hmm. So Scott was incredibly open with the two of you. So I want to play one more clip of what he said.
Tom and I go into Sanford's office. And I don't know what Sanford said that triggered me. To this day, I don't remember it, but he made a joke. And I I snapped and I went at him, like physically went at him, and Tom had to like restrain me. And I'm screaming at him at the top of my lungs. So much that his agent came in, opened the door, and I was like, "Get out! I'm going to kill him, but you can't be here when I do it."
Oh, wow. Okay.
Brutal.
So what does this say about your podcast really and its popularity that, I mean, people involved in these scandals are calling you to give you more dirt on this? Because as both of you said, I mean, I remember this so incredibly well. And you just sit there watching this as it's unfolding, being like, what is going on with this governor? And now you're getting this inside information.
Yeah, I think it's so valuable to have heard Scott's story because it demonstrates the personal toll that this whole scandal, had on a lot of people involved, especially the staff. I know it was a much longer conversation we had with Scott, and he really laid out the stress that it was having on them, the reactions that they were, like the reactions they were having, like chain smoking and things like that during this, and that was really stressful. So it was helpful for us to be able to get that personal cost. And Scott also talked about how it affected some of their careers moving forward. And that's where I really appreciate him reaching out. So not just that we better understand what happened, but also to understand some of the consequences of this scandal.
So you've given us 5 little mini episodes before the new season starts. And the one coming out this week is about President Donald Trump, including Trump accepting an airplane as a gift from the government of Qatar as the new Air Force One. So let's take a listen to a part of this.
Like you said, Jackie, this would be Air Force One. And so in a way, it would serve the presidency and not Donald Trump. But I still don't understand. Like, why is it going to his presidential library afterwards? Why doesn't it just stay as Air Force One? And that is what brings this into a real potential ethical or legal concern, and potentially even a bribe where, okay, this is just being given right out of the goodness of their hearts. What are they expecting down the road from us?
Your concerns were widely shared by others, Charlie, including usual allies of Trump, like conservative podcaster Ben Shapiro.
The arrangement itself is, shall we say, I believe the legal term, is skeezy. The Constitution literally says the U.S. government cannot accept official gifts from any king, prince, or foreign state. Qatar is not allegedly giving President Trump a $400 million jet out of the goodness of their sweet little hearts, no matter what Special Envoy Steve Witkoff says.
President Trump responded to these types of concerns by arguing that the plane is a good deal for the country.
So I think it's a great gesture from Qatar. I appreciate it very much. I would never be one to turn down that kind of an offer. I mean, I could be a stupid person and say, no, we don't want a free, very expensive airplane.
I'm not really sure if skeezy is a legal term, but with that said, tell us more about this episode and what people will hear this week on Scandalized.
Well, Jackie and I sort of made a concerted effort in season 1 to not necessarily completely avoid Donald Trump. He's kind of unavoidable, right? He's the president, but and he's had a fairly scandalous past in terms of his politics. But we didn't want this to be a show about Donald Trump. We wanted to dig into some of the lesser known scandals, ones where we felt like we could really add something. But after season 1 aired, Donald Trump gets reelected. He's back in the Oval Office in January, and it's been difficult to sort of uphold that rule of not talking about Donald Trump 9-10 months into this second administration, which, I mentioned how our other episodes were bite-sized. This one was over an hour, and we barely scratched the surface of some of the scandals that we could have talked about. And that's just because, candidly, this second administration, in terms of corruption and personal benefiting and its scandalous nature, is up there with the best of them in terms of presidential administrations. And so we couldn't not talk about it anymore.
Well, and Jackie, can we maybe talk about that a little bit more? Because I would assume, too, that because the first season was so popular, did you get any, feedback from folks being like, hey, are you going to maybe talk about President Trump? And I ask because A, it's interesting. There is a lot to dive into there, but also maybe giving people kind of a better understanding maybe of some of what's gone on within that administration.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And we did, I mean, and Trump definitely appeared probably in every episode in our first season in one way or another, just because he would show up as a character somehow related to whatever scandal we were talking about. I think there was some reaction that was kind of glad, to think about other sorts of scandals, but also some
Hmm.
interest in digging in deeper to some of the scandals in the first Trump administration and then this time around where we're really seeing almost a brazen, breaking of ethics, rules, and laws to really try to understand what is happening and why should we not overlook even the minor scandals of the second Trump administration, why we need to pay attention to both the big but also the small issues that are happening.
Hmm. So you also dove into Trump's pardon of all of the January 6th rioters. So here's one more clip from Scandalized.
So to be fair, some of these folks had committed much less serious crimes like trespassing, and obviously there were a lot of people here who were part of this demonstration but just kind of got swept up in the moment. And although those people in particular don't have a ton of my sympathy, I could at least imagine a more acceptable version of this pardon that just lets the non-violent offenders off the hook, or just goes maybe part of the way and significantly lightens their prison sentences. In fact, just before inauguration, even the Vice President-elect, J.D. Vance, appeared on Fox News Sunday and advocated for just this, a more targeted clemency for nonviolent rioters.
Where is the line drawn on who will and wouldn't be considered for a pardon?
I think it's very simple. Look, if you protested peacefully on January the 6th, you should be pardoned. If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. And there's a little bit of a gray area there, but we're very much committed to seeing the equal administration of law.
But ultimately, after he takes the oath of office on January 20th, Trump takes a different route.
So this is January 6th. These are the hostages. Approximately 1,500 for a pardon.
Yes.
Full pardon. So this is a big one. We hope they come out tonight, frankly.
He doesn't just pardon the nonviolent rioters, he frees everybody.
So can you tell us more about Trump using pardons and investigations? I mean, does this send a particular message to his opponents?
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the main reasons we wanted to cover it. Jackie mentioned before that Trump kept popping up in season 1, and part of the reason he kept popping up is because just by total accident, we didn't do this intentionally, but he kept pardoning the people who we were covering who had committed these crimes and scandals. And that was just from his first administration, and he has continued that in his second administration, pardoning individuals, allies, people who have praised him, people who supported him in the last election. And that, in this case, includes all of these January 6th rioters. And, it's important to sort of keep this stuff in perspective, especially as someone who studies Congress. Like, this is something that means a great deal to me. And the January 6th attacks were not that long ago. They were just a few years ago. And it took them only that long, and it took Trump only that long to rewrite so much of the history of what happened that day. You heard him in that clip refer to them as hostages, like political prisoners. It was another term he used a lot. And these were people that beat and killed police officers. They destroyed, members' offices in Congress. They called for the hanging of the vice president of the United States. And every single one of them was pardoned. And I think this is it's shocking in its own way, but it's also meant to, I don't get the sense that Donald Trump is like personally invested in each of these individual cases, but it's a way of saying to people, it's okay if this happens. And if it happens again, you can expect that I might just pardon you. And it really sends, in my opinion, a pretty dark message about what it is you can expect to get away with on the president's behalf.
Well, and what about the idea, though, too, that I would think that years from now, in history books, right? I mean, what kids learn in school, January 6th is going to be taught and talked about. So, Charlie or Jackie, I mean, Charlie, to your point, where you said how he has been able to rewrite this in some ways. I mean, how important is it then that you do cover this and you do talk about the facts of what happened?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of what we want to just make sure that we don't overlook some of these events, right? Because there's been so much that has happened this year, actions the Trump administration has taken in different ways. And we only focused on a few different scandals in this episode, but we do think it's so important to make sure that we keep this, we keep this of mind, and that we know that we establish what has been happening. And I think what Charlie was sharing about the January 6th pardons is exactly why it is important.
Okay, I want to switch gears very quickly. I only have about a couple minutes left with you. You have a lot of food scandals in these mini episodes. Can you just touch briefly on this and then tell us why like food faux pas can actually really cause problems for politicians?
Yeah, I mean, and this is especially fitting, I think, following the January 6th discussion, which, is very intense and important and serious. But we do like to keep it light as well. We want that, these are a couple of scandals. I even put scandals in quotation marks here. Some of these are just kind of faux pas or accidents or, people getting sick sometimes. And, it's very human. You can't control these things. But yeah, I mean, we covered a few different types. The ones that I really like are ones that we covered in our first episode of the season, which are ones where, you're a politician, you're out on the campaign trail, and you're trying to like eat some local delicacy, or trying to make a connection with the voters based on some local food or supermarket chain or something like that, and you flub it, right? Or you eat it the wrong way, and it sort of reveals something that maybe you're not quite the most authentic New Yorker or Pennsylvanian or Idahoan, for that matter, that maybe you're trying to present yourself as. And this is something that really matters for representation.
Okay, am I remembering this correctly? I don't remember who it was, but didn't some candidate eat like pizza with a fork and they just got skewered about it?
That's correct. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio, just a couple weeks into his term, ate pizza with a fork and a knife, and it just dominated the news cycle for a few days.
Okay, before I let you go, what's coming up next week on Scandalized, and when does season 2 come out?
Yeah, we're really excited about our last episode here, the live show we did from Treefort. In this episode, Jackie and I decided to take a non-traditional approach. We each brought a new scandal to the table, but we didn't tell each other what it was, what each of our scandals were before the live show. So we got genuine reactions from each other, which was a lot of fun and sort of mirrored what the audience was going through. It was a ton of fun. And then, we've already got a bunch of ideas for season 2. The brainstorming session for season 1, we came up with about 1,000 ideas. We're never going to run out of ideas or political scandals that we can cover. So, we sort of begin the process of narrowing it down, seeing where we can make the biggest contribution, where we can help people's understanding about politics. And then, we'll record throughout the year, and we're going to hope to launch the full 8-episode season 2 later in 2026.
Well, I want to thank both of you for coming on today. I love talking with the two of you and talking about this podcast. So thanks for making time for us today.
Thanks for having
so much,
us.
Gemma.
We've been talking with Boise State University political scientist Charlie Hunt and Jackie Kettler about their podcast Scandalized. Now, another mini episode comes out next week, and then season 2 officially in the fall. You can find all of the episodes of Scandalized on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Thanks so much for listening. And just a reminder, you can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.
The stories don't stop when this podcast does. Boise State Public Radio's Instagram gives you reels, updates, and snapshots from our reporters in the field. Follow Boise State Public Radio on Instagram today.